In a small town, a heavy-set, shy, 16-year-old high school student named Jimmy Mulligan gets constantly picked on by the high school's bully, Miles, and his crew. Despite having loving parents, Terry and Kathy Mulligan, Jimmy feels lonely most of the time, as he is an only child and only has two introverted friends named Andy and Bobby, who are also on the wrong end of the social standing at school. In school, Jimmy and his friends live in fear and carefully walk the hallways, hoping to avoid running into Miles and his friends. One day, after a hellish experience with Miles and his crew, Jimmy and his friends rush to make it on time to their economics class, where a gothic, outcast girl named Adrian Collins shows interest in Jimmy, who is too afraid to do anything about it. One day, as Jimmy walks home from school through the suburbs, Miles and his friend drive up to him. Miles gets out of the car, pushes Jimmy onto one of the front yards, and starts beating him up, declaring that the only way he'd even consider leaving Jimmy alone was if he paid him $100. As Jimmy cowers defenseless, the owner of the house, Mr. Clarence Jackson, Action, comes to his rescue and chases away Miles. Inside the house, Jimmy and Action start getting to know each other, and Jimmy is fascinated to learn that the old man was a well-known, successful boxer back in the day. Excited by the possibilities, Jimmy asks Action to teach him to defend himself, to which the old man is sympathetic and, citing that his boxing days are behind him, agrees to introduce Jimmy to the best trainer in town, named Manny. Action then drives the traumatized boy back to his home, introduces himself to the Mulligans, and asks their permission to start taking Jimmy to the boxing gym. However, even though Mulligans thank Action profusely for looking out for their son and for patching him up, they fail to understand the gravity of the situation and politely refuse his offer for the boxing lessons. Sadly, a few weeks later, Jimmy returns home from school with a face full of bruises, which forces his parents to change their minds and rush to take up Action on his offer as soon as possible. Action receives the news happily and takes the Mulligans to the local boxing gym, where they are formally introduced to Manny and are given a training schedule set to start the next day. Jimmy starts his basic training with Manny, who inspires him to harness power from his bigger size and keeps him motivated. One evening, as he returns from training, Jimmy confides his school troubles with Miles to Action, and the old man wisely advises him to buy himself some time by promising to pay Miles $200. After a week of training, Jimmy feels exhausted from all the demanding activities and finds himself deflated in all aspects as he starts to doubt his journey, feeling like he will never be able to master boxing and defend himself or his friends. During training, Manny sees the new downturn in Jimmy's spirits and warns Action that he will stop training Jimmy, as he no longer wants to waste his time on someone going through the motions just for the sake of it, while hundreds of passionate and talented kids request to join his gym every day. Both the Mulligans and Action try to inspire and motivate Jimmy and get him the bigger picture in his tiresome training, to no avail. A few days later, unprovoked, Miles beats up Bobby at school and warns Jimmy to prepare the money, while threatening to ruin all their lives if he fails to make good on his promise. Later that day, unable to contain his newfound motivation and his eagerness, Jimmy hurries home to take his bike and ride to the gym without even waiting for Action to pick him up. There, he pleasantly surprises Manny with his passion and puts in extra effort to master all that he is taught. As Action and Manny observe closely, Jimmy spends the next few weeks exercising on his own to put in some extra cardio exercises and attends his training religiously, which helps him lose some weight and become a little stronger. One day at school, Miles loses his patience with Jimmy, sneaks up on Jimmy and Andy, and demands his money. Later, Jimmy confides in Andy about his new boxing journey and his hopes of diverting Miles's attention until he gets everything in order. Later that day, to Jimmy's utter delight, Adrian asks him out to accompany her to a party at her friend's house, and he nervously accepts. The night of the party, Jimmy's parents excitedly watch their son prepare for his date. Then, they meet Adrian and her mother as they see the young couple off, warning them to make safe choices and respect their curfew. At the party, Jimmy and Adrian are welcomed by Betty and are surprised that most of the kids from school, including the coolest senior named Vinny, are in attendance. Jimmy Jimmy and Adrian spend the evening drinking conservatively, having a blast, getting to know each other better, and end up kissing. However, this nice interaction is interrupted by one of Miles's crew members, who approaches Jimmy looking to scare him and to start trouble. To everyone's surprise, Jimmy confidently and calmly warns the bully to leave them alone, which he complies with, fearing the threat in Jimmy's voice. Jimmy gets home to find his parents extremely excited over their son's newfound social life and confidence, and they tell him how much they like Adrian. The next morning, as Action explores the new phone Jimmy bought him in hopes of introducing him to technology, he receives a call from Jimmy who asks him for a ride to take Adrian to the boxing gym, which the old man agrees to. At mid-morning, Action takes Adrian and Jimmy to Manny's boxing gym, which surprises Adrian. There, Adrian meets Manny, who introduces her to an excellent female boxer named Rosie, who inspires the young girl to consider standing up for herself against the many rude comments she receives in school by demonstrating her many professional boxing skills. Then, Jimmy starts his training with Manny and impresses Adrian with his courage, passion, and strength. Pumped with Adrian's support, even though it's Sunday and his day off, Jimmy wakes up early the next morning and rushes to the gym without even having breakfast. There, Manny is pleasantly surprised by Jimmy's dedication, informs Action of the developments, asking him to join them at the gym, and introduces Jimmy to a mixed martial arts professional named Dakila, who teaches him unconventional and effective new moves, while Action and Manny pleasantly observe and muse over how far Jimmy has come in the last few weeks. The next day, at school, Manny and Andy are accosted by Miles, who cites Jimmy's disrespect for his friend at the party as a reason for his sudden impatience to receive his money before challenging Jimmy for a show-off for after school later that day. Later, Vinny approaches Jimmy, compliments him on his new looks, mentions that he knows about his training with Manny, and wishes him luck in beating up Miles and shutting him up once and for all. Unfortunately, one of Miles's friends overhears this conversation and reports to Miles about Jimmy's hidden talents, who immediately orders his friend to contact and arrange for an adult ex-convict known as Glass Jaw Billy to come to the school after hours and back him up, promising to pay him $200. Fortunately, the friend's conversation with Glass Jaw Billy is also overheard by another student, who immediately informs Vinny. Without any hesitation, Vinny calls his mafia connections and asks them to come to school later that day and help him out. Meanwhile, Adrian senses the tension between Miles and Jimmy and, out of fear for Jimmy's well-being, calls Manny to ask him for help. However, after hearing her concerns, Manny politely refuses to get involved, citing that Jimmy should learn to fight his own battles and that he believes in his ability to defend himself. After school, all the students gather around in the schoolyard, eagerly waiting to see what's going to happen. Miles and his friends arrive there early and egg on the crowd, who cheer with expectation as Andy and Jimmy show up. Miles starts by demanding the money and narrates how his ex-convict friend is on his way to the school to personally take the money from Jimmy, while Jimmy stands his ground and refuses to pay up. The fight begins, and Jimmy patiently takes a couple of knocks as he prepares to get into gear, remembering all that he learned from Manny in Action over the past few weeks. Jimmy then starts to hit back to the delight and cheer of the students, who have all grown extremely tired of Miles and his bullying. Action also joins the crowd and watches proudly as his protege stands up for himself in more ways than expected. The fight continues, and as Miles suffers a few blows, he screams for his friends to join in and help him. His friends do as told and join the fight by restraining Jimmy so that Miles can beat him up without fearing retribution. Suddenly, Bobby and Adrian muster all their courage to join in the historic fight and manage to knock out the extra people so that Jimmy can have a chance to participate in a fair fight. As everyone, including the mafia guys, watches in delight, Jimmy manages to beat Miles up rather well and warns the arrogant bully to leave him and everyone else at the school alone before walking away, surrounded with cheers and applause, while Adrian and his friends join him with massive relief and pride. This epic fight is recorded and wastes no time in going viral on the internet. At the gym, Action and Manny proudly watch the video over and over again, congratulating each other on a job well done. The video also makes it to the local news, where it's broadcast as an inspirational example of fighting against bullies and standing up for oneself, right after which a wanted poster is announced for the now missing Glass Jaw Billy. Jimmy's parents watch the video on the news and become filled with mixed emotions of utter fear and extreme pride. They congratulate their son for his courage and shower him with admiration, while elsewhere, after disposing of Glass Jaw Billy, the Mafia also watches the news of the fight with excitement. The next day, Jimmy returns to school with pride, and as the whole school watches in admiration, he is joined by Adrian, Bobby, and Andy as he confidently walks through the halls without looking over his shoulders in fear. The end.